for your statement. Representative Estes, you're recognized for your opening statement.
Chairman Cole, Ranking Member McGovern, members of the Rules Committee, thank you for allowing me to testify today in my capacity as a member of the House Budget Committee. The Fiscal Responsibility Act is more than a bipartisan agreement. It's a win for American people that will start pushing back on the insatiable desire Washington has to spend other people's money. And I hope my colleagues would join me in supporting it in the House. We're here today just days before the federal government cannot pay all its ongoing bills. The government hit the statutory debt limit of borrowing in January, and Treasury Secretary Yellen has been delaying some expenditures using extraordinary measures. This legislation would raise our ability to borrow money for another 2 years and thereby avoid the damaging consequences of not paying our obligations. But as Speaker McCarthy, my Republican colleagues, and I have said for months, we cannot just keep borrowing and spending without addressing the major drivers of our current fiscal mess. Like any family or individual that has gone into deep debt, the underlying causes need to be addressed before we raise the limit on our national credit card and just spend more without any change in behavior. That's why Speaker McCarthy, on behalf of House Republicans, insisted on incorporating some fiscal reforms, as has often been done by previous Congresses in budget negotiations, as part of the debt limit increase. This bill begins that process by putting enforceable spending caps in place for fiscal year 24 and 25. We will spend less money next fiscal year than we did this year. According to CBO, this bill will reduce overall non-defense discretionary spending by $40 billion, or roughly 5.4%, the largest one-year reduction in non-defense spending ever. Spending on non-defense programs will be limited to $704 billion from last year's level of $744 billion, and a reduction of $111 billion compared to the CBO baseline, or $105 billion below the President's request. At the same time, this measure also funds defense at $886 billion for fiscal year 24, a 3.3% increase over fiscal year 23. As far as economic growth measures, in addition to limiting out-of-control spending, the Fiscal Responsibility Act also includes some critical economic growth measures. First, it will increase labor force participation by expanding work requirements for able-bodied adults in the SNAP food stamp and Temporary Assistance for Needy Family, or TANF programs. These are two important reforms that will bring more workers into the labor force, but ensures that only those who can work, the able-bodied adults without dependents, are required to do so. The Fiscal Responsibility Act also includes some needed permitting reforms, which will help build infrastructure, produce more energy, create American jobs, and reduce costs to consumers. Beyond discretionary spending controls and these important economic growth measures, there are other significant provisions in this bill that deserve highlighting. The Fiscal Responsibility Act finally ends the federal student loan moratorium and the so-called interest pause, effective August 31st, 2023. For every month borrowers were allowed to skip payments, $4.3 billion were added to the American taxpayers' debt. 41 months later, the moratorium has cost American taxpayers approximately $176 billion. This bill also rescinds nearly $28 billion in unspent COVID funds. Republicans and Democrats now finally agree the national emergency has ended and this funding is no longer necessary. The dollars were not needed during the emergency. These funds are not yet obligated, and they should be returned to the rightful owner, the American taxpayer. Fiscal Responsibility Act also requires the executive branch to offset any potential spending increases caused by executive actions. This is an important new safeguard as the Biden administration has increased spending by billions of dollars over the past 2 years with its executive actions without congressional authorization. This action alone should be reviewed as a major win for fiscal responsibility. Of course, this bill is not perfect. It does not address all of the things I and others wanted it to do. It's the byproduct of hard-fought negotiations between Speaker McCarthy and President Biden. And when I look at the list of major wins for conservatives and the American people, it's hard not to be excited that we're finally reducing spending, encouraging work, and reining in the executive branch. I've been fighting to change the culture of Washington since Kansans first sent me here 6 years ago, and this bill is another opportunity to make improvements. The alternative is much worse, a so-called clean debt ceiling that once again kicks our opportunity to bring fiscal responsibility to Washington, D.C. down the road. This is a great bill, and it lays the groundwork to continue making positive change that will benefit our country for generations to come. It should be noted that this is only the first step in correcting the financial mess we're in. It took years to get to this point, and it won't change overnight. I introduced an amendment in the last Congress to cut non-defense spending by a mere 1%, and it failed here in the Rules Committee. I'll continue fighting for fiscal sanity, cutting wasteful spending, and promoting economic growth. This is the start of changing that trajectory, and I look forward to working with you all to do even more in the future. I support the bill, and I hope my colleagues do as well. I would be glad to answer any questions. I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much.